Welcome to this episode of Clinically Pressed. On this episode, we have one of our ambassadors, Alex Friedman, who is a strength and conditioning coach currently out in Colorado. We talk a lot about just what Alex has been up to, but also in that, his experience at the UFC training facility in Vegas. I would say probably the mecca of combat sports training. And so we really get into what the nuts and bolts of that looked like and what they are doing for their fighters, and it's really impressive and admirable for what they are trying to do to help the sport and advance everything with the fighting and the training, the nutrition, the mindset, and all of that. So really fascinating episode when it comes to that, and we hope you enjoy. Well, welcome to this episode of Clinically Pressed. Today we are on with Alex Friedman, who is one of our Clinically Pressed ambassadors that we really haven't done anything with.
Right.
That might be a whole other conversation for another day. But anyway, in the midst of all of the craziness, Alex and I are catching up as he reached out, which I appreciate because I'm terrible at it. But in the process, we wanted to get a little conversation going about what Alex has been up to because it's been unique, and that is mainly looking at how he's gone from a collegiate wrestler, so a section of combat athlete, to now he's working on his thesis, I believe is the best way to say it, around hydration and weight cutting and all of the things that go into that, plus some of the other stuff he's done. Mainly the one I really want to hear about is his time at the UFC training center in Vegas, because I do remember you telling me about the interview process and that they held nothing back in challenging you on the science and everything to make sure you knew what you were talking about. So with that, I guess maybe let's start with just a little bit of your background in being, a high level wrestler to kind of where you're at currently, and we'll go from there.
Well, first off, thank you for saying high level wrestler. I don't know that that's completely accurate.
I don't know, man. Anytime you can be competing towards the national level at any division in college, you're doing all right.
So I started at EWL, collegiate athlete, and then through there I found the exercise science program and buddied up with Joel, and we started working on an internship with the Sports Performance Center there and things like that. And that really kind of springboarded my interest into strength and conditioning and coaching, and what that means or how I can best help athletes as I go forward. And through that, I applied to different internships, looked at different routes of strength and conditioning or sports performance in route to help people. And then I found the University of Denver, where I spent a year being a fellow as well as enrolled in their graduate program, which is a Master's of the Arts in Sport Coaching. And so going through that program, I've learned a lot about coaching, coach research, and different approaches that highlight and kind of accent the physical sciences that we all kind of live and die by. So through that Master's of the Arts program, I've been able to kind of reorient myself, looking at research, looking at coaching practices, looking at different, healthcare methods that we employ around athletes and around athlete care. And then after that year kind of came up, still in the program, finishing up, but then I was applying to different experiences, different internships, trying to kind of broaden my experience, and having a wrestling background and still being very curious and involved in the sport. I looked at the UFC Performance Institute in Las Vegas, and they're a center that acts as an open resource to all UFC athletes. So if you're a UFC athlete, have a contract, you can come there to train, get diagnostic testing, PT resources, and just holistic care as far as nutrition, strength and conditioning, exercise science, physical therapy, and different things in that regard, which is a huge benefit to their athletes. And so I applied for their strength and conditioning internship, and then I applied 3 or 4 times, to be honest. So,
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Persistence.
yep. So I made a contact through the University of Colorado, who knew the people there, and got an interview. And that kind of, as Joel preluded, they hammered me pretty good on the interview. They had a lot of, I think, high expectations from their interns, or whether it was combat experience, strength and conditioning experience, strength and conditioning with combat weight class athletes experience. And so I kind of checked all those boxes, and then performed at the interview. And so they gave me a shot, and it ended up being an awesome experience. They got a ton of really good people there, really good educators as well as practitioners. So while I was there, I learned a lot and formed my thesis, or my research project, that I will be finishing with my graduate studies. And that is centered around rapid weight loss, cutting weight, techniques, and kind of an overarching look into the culture that is wrestling and that is cutting weight. So it's going to be more through a sociological lens, where I'm writing autoethnography, so an ethnography about my experiences, where I view cutting weight and view wrestling through a few different lenses. I provide my narrative of my cutting weight story and my kind of career as it led up to that, what my values were, what drove me to those, and again, kind of the culture of cutting weight and of wrestling. And then I look back at it from a strength and conditioning and a healthcare practitioner role, and see how and where those support systems could have performed or failed to perform, or what happened in that regard. And then I finally analyze it through a coach researcher perspective, a coach researcher lens, and we look at theories and different ways that we can tie theory into the practice that goes in with the culture of wrestling and things that go along with that. So in a nutshell, that's where I am.
Interesting that you're going on it as a qualitative. That
Yes.
would be really interesting, and I only happen to know that because I've just finished a qualitative research course earlier this year. So I want to get more into the weight cutting and stuff. That's one I've had a lot of conversations about here. I think you and I have talked about it. I've talked to soon to be Dr. Tuhei about it. But we'll come back to that on just like the best approaches with it. But I really want to hear more about like the UFC training center. This whole podcast got started around, it was myself as an athletic trainer / pretend strength coach, a PhD in Dr. Jagum, and then a chiropractor in Dr. Kyle. And we always believed in kind of the collaborative care model. We're big fans of Exos and how they do it. I just got done reading, which I would highly recommend, even if you aren't a healthcare practitioner, Bridging the Gap, from Rehab to Performance, Sue Falsoni, who was at Exos and was one of the first, I think she was the first female head athletic trainer in Major League Baseball.
Okay.
But just talked about like the importance of like having common language. And so her and the strength coach could go back and forth at Exos, and instead of being like every specific exercise, yes or no, the strength coach could sit there and be like, can they push vertically? Can they pull vertically? And if she said no, then they automatically knew all the exercises that eliminated. And so it didn't have to be an exercise by exercise thing, but because they had the common language. So long story short in all of this, what did you see at the UFC training center in that regard? Because if it is fully, you can come here and you can get all of the things you started listing, how did that work, and what did you take away from that?
Yeah, man, it blew me away, because, And I was fortunate enough to be exposed to it at UWL with, a merriment, however it may have happened through athletic training and strength conditioning or sports performance.
Not quite as refined as we'd like it, but everybody talked to each other and nobody seemed to get overly upset with one another. So
it was, yeah, the relationship was there, and it was functioning. And then moving on to University of Denver, and my experience, being a fellow there, they had a hugely integrated system through their athletic training and sports performance, and that was a huge priority among the staff. And so it was a big kind of kudos to their program that they're able to accomplish that in a collegiate setting, which is very hard to accomplish. At the UFC, it was, full tilt, integrated system, collaboration all the time, everywhere. And that was one of the things that, again, blew me away when I got there. It was not, what do we consider for this guy strength and conditioning or this athlete for strength and conditioning? It was, where are they at with their weight cut? Where are they at, in their health and diagnostics? Do they have a fight coming up? And how can we integrate that and provide a whole package for an athlete rather than this one isolated resource? And going from that, talking to, the mentors there, shout out to the strength and conditioning staff, Bo Sandoval, Matt Crawley, and Kyle Larimer. They helped me out a lot in understanding how you move forward professionally in that setting. But it was really well organized, and Bo was probably one of the guys that talked to me the most about this because everybody shared a collaborative space. It wasn't like strength coaches live in this weight room with their offices there, ATs over here in that area, and then nutrition and dietetics has, classrooms. It was one office unit with all the exercise science, health diagnostic people in there. And then when they kind of split up, or every week we had 2 team meetings, every time we were in the office, everybody was talking. And the logistics of that kind of led into the collaborative approach and allowed the collaboration to happen on a much higher frequency, but at a much higher performance as well. So typically what it looked like, if you're a incoming UFC athlete, if you want to schedule a visit to the UFC PI, or you want to, utilize some benefits for physical therapy, you might come there because you need physical therapy or rehab on a hand or on a knee or something like that, and utilize that resource. But what we can do when you come in is we can utilize our staff to schedule out strength and conditioning sessions, schedule out exercise science consultations, schedule out dietetics, and then on your way out, we can have a cumulative meeting of all the resources that you had and how we can integrate that into a program, or the information that the athlete or the coaches need coming out of that. So, like I said, every week we talked about all the incoming athletes. We talked about how we can best serve them, and then really offer the best strategies on all fronts in a holistic view, rather than provide a strength conditioning program, provide a nutritional program in separate silos, I guess.
how did that go? Like, did everybody kind of stay in their lane, for lack of a better description? I use that in quotes. And I guess the example is like, ATs can get CSCS certified, which is great. I don't know that it always means everything that it could.
Right.
So they might have an input into a strength and conditioning program, or anybody, AT, strength coach, or otherwise, because nutrition is such a hot topic. I would almost hate to be a registered dietitian sometimes, because everybody sees the next headline and thinks they understand nutrition. There's so many things out there with that. Like, how did you see, from your point of view in that, like, how did that work? Did people throw out ideas to each other about that, where there was this kind of understanding that it's never necessarily a challenge, it's more of just throwing this out there kind of a deal, and then you kind of rely on the expertise? Or did that just kind of not happen? No. You just understood that everybody was really good at what they do, so you're trusting that they're going to be on the forefront of anything and everything anyway.
No, yeah, I think there's definitely a level of trust and level of communication that go into that. Where everybody shined was, in their specific discipline and strength and conditioning or whatever, and you trust in that they're going to perform their function really well. And that's, again, that's a huge trust thing. That's a huge communication thing. But there were these macro meetings where we all met and talked about athletes, but then there's these micro transactions and micro meetings. You know, it's like, I had this athlete at 10 for physical therapy. I see you have him at 2 for strength and conditioning. Here's what we covered. Here's how this happened, you know, and there's, you know, this athlete has this nutritional strategy. I, as a strength and conditioning coach, go to the nutrition team. I see that she hasn't eaten carbs today all day. She's got an intense workout. Maybe we can change that strategy next week, or we change that right now at this point. And just different microtransactions like that, and different respecting, I don't want to say barriers, but respecting expertise, like you said, and understanding that everybody's on the same path to offer the athlete a maximal healthcare and performance benefit. You know, there's everybody's leading to the same kind of road, and everybody's on the same team. So there's not really room for, you know, egos or this or that, or I know this better or whatever. There's just one collaboration. There's not different services.
Gotcha. Sports science wise, just super curious, what were some of the go-tos, or if they did, specifically with combat athletes, in the whole context?
Man, yeah. So that was huge there. I know they operated similarly with the performance team and the exercise sciences, you know, the Olympic Training Center did. But go-tos for sports science is as many people as we could onboarded onto Omega Wave.
Okay.
And got a lot of diagnostic information, or I guess observational information from there.
Sure.
And then as we went through, as we introduced athletes, we had everybody go through, you know, diagnostic screening. Not necessarily, you know, like a 1 rep max at anything, but a strength and conditioning protocol, a nutrition assessment, a physical therapy assessment. And through all of those batteries of tests that, you know, utilized watt bikes, Polar Pros, we did VO2 maxes, we did just a lot of different performance measures, or just measures to see where an athlete's at so that we can meet them there. And again, there was excellent sports scientist, Roman Foman, there, who digested all the information, you know, accumulated it together, and was able to read that data and give it back to the athlete in understandable context, but also provide it to the team so that we knew what we could do with it. As much as strength and conditioning was in charge of our own diagnostics and our own tests, it's one piece of the picture for the whole athlete profile. So it was, again, a collaboration.
Love it.
Yeah. So it was, and the sports science was very advanced. When I was there, they were looking at things like different, you know, neural technologies and neural mapping stuff that they can move forward with from that. And I think that was the next thing on their horizon, you know, cognitive-based training, things like that. But what I got from it was you're using the technology to your advantage, and you still need an expert to analyze all the tools.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, it's one of those. There's a lot of things around it, you know, like stupid, you know, not stupid sayings, but little sayings of like, you know, what gets measured gets accomplished. You got to know where you started to know where you know, where you've been to know where you're going, type of a deal. So like, you don't really know if you're doing anything if you don't have the numbers to back it up. Well, then that is only as good as how you use it.
Yeah.
Like you guys they could run all those tests and it just sits there, but if it's never put back into seemingly the clinical or the practical setting, then what's the freaking point? Like, that's awesome. You got data, you know,
right.
And maybe you can go back and find stuff, and there's a time and a place for that type of stuff. But yeah, that's awesome that it is utilized. Not that it's shocking that it was, but
right. And like you said, those kind of small little sayings. It's funny. Duncan French is the vice president of performance there, so he oversees the whole collaborative team. And one of the comments or quotes he said, he's like, "If you're not assessing, you're guessing."
Yeah,
so,
that's another one. I like that one.
And so, like, as much as it is, we need to understand where each athlete is at. We need to use the data or the relationship we have in a meaningful way. And how do you assign meaning to those data is through expertise and experience and knowledge around performance, around health, around, you know, every discipline that you have that goes towards those things.
For sure. I know we talked about this off camera, so we won't get too much. We're going to try and do another one specifically around the training. So we won't get too far into that. But before we transition over to kind of more of what you're doing with the weight cutting, anything else UFC experience wise that you wanted to cover? You mentioned when we were just off camera, the communication and the interaction was maybe different than what you've had experienced in the collegiate world. My mind wanders as to what that might be, but I'll let you fill it in.
No, right. It's hugely interesting to me, especially in my studies, you know, on the qualitative end of coaching, you know, looking at different athlete relationships and how power dynamics operate in this, you know, society that we have, or in this specific culture or specific area that you're working.
Interesting. We may need to talk about that, because for my dissertation, I've got something very similar in mind.
Okay. Yeah, we can expand on that. But so first off, with the frameworks that I'm kind of comparing is, you know, collegiate student athlete that has a coach that is accountable and is responsible to follow that coach and more or less the coach wields the power in the relationship, right? Whereas at the UFC, each athlete is an independent contractor that contracts with the UFC, and we're providing this service back to the athletes. So, and I found this a little bit, again, in training, you know, I had some experience getting to train professional hockey athletes at the University of Denver and things like this. The relationship is different in those senses, whereas it's not as power laden. It can be a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more communicated, I guess, rather than you're on this strict schedule of I have to get this done and we need to be
right
on it type of thing. But at the UFC, it was a mutual relationship where, you know, I'm offering a expert service to you and you're understanding the value of that. Or we can communicate to you the value of that. And the athletes were above and beyond grateful for everything that we could provide to them. And then on the flip side of that, we were there to offer the best services possible that we could. So it was just a different level of communication rather than, you know, you see, I don't know if you watch the College Game Day special on strength coaches, but I can send you that link later. But
yeah, please do. Provides
just a scary, overbearing picture of a strength coach that all he does is yell and demand more from the weight room, right? Where that setting was not present at the UFC Performance Institute.
Interesting.
It was a relationship and a mutual growth. It wasn't a follow these orders, do or this type of thing. It wouldn't have worked if it was a commanding style of relationship. So looking at that is very interesting, and breaking down strength and conditioning into, you know, how it's came out or how the profession has evolved. It's hugely interesting to see it grow into what it is and different power dynamics that go along with that. Sorry, said a lot, but didn't say a lot. I know.
No, it's good. You know, I wonder. So, you were a Division III athlete. That's currently where I work at. Where, you know, there's no scholarships,
right?
And so they're doing it. You know, athletes are doing it for the love of the sport, because you're doing it because you want to, you know, or you're even actually paying to do it to continue your career. So in some form or fashion, you're getting a little bit more buy-in to some degree because they're doing it. But at the same time, there's nothing holding anybody's feet to the fire, because if you want to be done, like, there's nothing holding you to that. you know,
Right.
Division One, I think you get a lot of people that are hoping to go to that next level, and there could be a scholarship tied to it. So sometimes
Yeah.
you'll get a little bit more of that in there, but then you still are dealing with 18 to 22-year-olds, and you know, some
Right.
of them don't really want to do it, but they're on scholarship, so why wouldn't they continue to do it? And I wonder if there's a transition where, you know, especially for those UFC guys, like that's a tremendous service for the UFC to provide, but like that is that guy's, you know, life. Like that is his
Yeah. Yeah.
income. That is his livelihood. And I could see where you could. That's awesome that it's a mutual respect, because I could see it going the other way where, you know, the athlete would almost demand it because you are there serving them.
Right.
But you know, if they're not necessarily paying you, that group, directly,
Mm-hmm.
you know, or it's not like you are an independent contractor and they come to you and say, you know, I'm
Right.
gonna pay you 10 grand to train me. Well, now you're at their beck and call
Yeah.
because of
Kind of.
that. I think that's a really unique, almost, it's a unique business model, which is awesome, but it
Yeah.
also kind of creates that where, you know, obviously as the staff, you want to do a really good job because you want a job.
Right.
You want people there, but for those guys, when it's not coming strictly out of their pocket per se,
Yeah.
they don't really have anything to stand on that, you know, that those staff could call them out and just be like, dude, you're full of crap. Like,
Right.
get out of here. You're a headache to us.
Well, and it's interesting too. Like you
Huh.
said, you mentioned that it's an interesting, structure, an interesting, organization for a business. And I can speak a little bit to the motivations of why the UFC is committing this multi-million-dollar facility and these expert level practitioners for a free service for the UFC fighter. And one is to reduce the amount of canceled fight due to injury,
Sure.
right? That's a
Yeah.
huge money loss. And then reduce the amount of athletes missing weight, because that is, I don't want to say commonplace, but that's been a reoccurring issue for UFC athletes.
Yeah.
And since the implementation of the UFC PI, and there's no direct studies that correlate or cause, but there's been a lot less injury, cancellations of fight, and a lot less athletes missing weight. And so that was part of the motivation, is the ability to keep fighters on the card and keep the money growing potential of the fight to happen. And then the UFC is almost at a point where they've overtaken the combat sport realm. They're the premier professional organization for combat sports. And they've endeavored through a couple different competitors to do that. If you're around the combat world, like Bellator and any different
Mm-hmm.
professional organizations in that realm, the UFC got to a point where their best way to grow as a organization is to grow the sport of mixed martial arts and to promote that combat athlete culture around the world. And so that was part of the motivation into building another UFC Performance Institute in Shanghai, which they opened a year or two ago. So that's another part of their kind of strategy or scheme into why you would provide this resource to the UFC fighter as an individual contractor.
Makes sense.
So, but yeah, it was a great experience, both seeing the interaction and relationships between professionals and between an interdisciplinary team, but also a coach-athlete relationship that is, from my experience, very atypical in that setting. So I learned a lot as far as, what interacting with athletes means and how you can perceive that differently, and how you as a coach can influence that, the values, or influence the quote unquote want to be there. You say, you have Division I athletes that may not ever want to do strength and conditioning, but what can I do as a practitioner to create value into the strength and conditioning, or what can I do as a coach to help this athlete understand the value of the services provided, And so
Sure.
just flipping the script a little bit.
Yeah. Jumping into your thesis,
Yep.
um, without you having to go through the whole process of it, you were talking a little bit about like the evolution of it over the past almost 90 years. It sounds like you had kind of referenced the first study you had seen.
Yeah.
And in that regard, probably not that much changing over the time. I'm sure there's been some ebbs and flows where people tried to go about it. It's very different.
Yeah.
When you talk UFC, these guys have weeks and months to, drop weight, whereas um, wrestlers, you're kind of in a perpetual state of it
Yeah.
throughout your season, just because matches are once or twice a week and so on and so forth. And I
Yeah.
know for me, and this is way easier said than done, just looking at it, a couple prime examples is, if you can fuel yourself with better fuel, some of the issues that people were having in terms of weight cutting would go down. But I know that is so simple to say,
Yeah.
especially to a college kid. So kind of on that, thoughts on like why this is important, for reasons that are maybe obvious or may not. And
Yeah.
then also, what do you think it's going to take to potentially have a culture or a mindset change in that?
Yeah. There's a lot to chew on there.
Yeah, I know. I like to ask those kind of questions.
That's
Then I
good.
just get to sit and listen.
Yeah. Right. So I'll start first with kind of the research and where that's been at a disconnect with the practice, right? So like you said, as I've been researching and kind of reviewing, I've found articles as early as 1930s that point out a problem of athletes wrestlers trying to make weight for competition, and how that has presented a problem in performance, but also presented a problem in just athlete care in general. And since then, research and quantitative as well as qualitative, mostly quantitative studies have looked into health risks, prevalences, and different indicators of why rapid weight loss strategies and techniques are decrements to performance, decrements to mental health, decrements to like continue to sustain success. And so while there have been, small and in my, I don't know, I guess in my researched opinion, insignificant links to competitive success, cutting weight has overall just been painted in, quantitative research as a negative thing. Every research article, every review of literature comes to the conclusion of athletes should avoid rapid weight loss strategies. Athletes consult a physician or a dietitian about rapid weight loss techniques, and in many senses that can be somewhat mitigated by consulting a physician and a dietitian. The overall conclusion from literature is avoid these rapid weight loss strategies. That being said, rapid weight loss and cutting weight is more prevalent than ever in wrestling and combat sports and everything, and it's part of the quote unquote culture, as we talked about before. So the problem I think there's a huge disconnect between the out culture, which is academia, research, and different methods of that, and the in culture, which is the actual wrestlers and coaches participating in the practice. And so what are the researchers and academics doing wrong that this message is not reaching this population that is specifically trying to address, right? And so what I kind of looked at as my approach to this study is to try and almost bridge the gap between a quantitative, very scientific laden literature of saying cutting weight is bad into a more autoethnographic sense where I can tell a story. I'm a wrestler. I'm part of this culture. Here's my experience, and here's my analysis of what is going on currently with rapid weight loss and cutting weight. And hopefully overall we can move that agenda away from the dangerous rapid weight loss strategies that I think a lot of people don't know about, and a lot of people in the culture preach. Part of my research too is I found that even though a lot of these conclusions and a lot of the results instruct people to consult physicians and dietitians about rapid weight loss strategies, I think, and I can't remember specifically the number, but it's upwards of 70% of athletes get cutting weight instruction from their peers and their coaches, who are not physicians or dietitians.
And even then, going to a physician or a dietitian.
Why would I listen to a physician or dietitian that doesn't know what cutting weight is?
I mean, that's it too. And, you got to find the person that understands it, which I think is unique, because most physicians and dietitians, unless they are specifically related to combat sports, are like, well, you shouldn't do this, period. Like,
right. Yeah, it's bad.
So it's kind of like a catch-22.
Yeah, and so that's where the UFC did a great job in their recruiting and in their hiring process. They got Clint Wattenberg, who is a former wrestler at Cornell and assistant wrestling coach, sport dietitian from Cornell, who he's part of the culture, right? He did wrestling. He competed at the national level. He started to fight, and again, so he's part of the culture, and now has his dietitian license, I guess is the right word. And so he does a great job, in my opinion, of bridging the gap and communicating with these athletes on, here's what you have done, and here's, yes, what's been successful for you or may not have been successful, but here's what I can provide as a resource. And it's not everything you're doing wrong. It's, here's how we can change that and slowly move towards a healthier or a more optimal functioning weight loss strategy type of thing.
Do you think to change culture, or at least to kind of adapt, like you kind of alluded to it there, and like not necessarily going in and being like, this is wrong and you can't do this, because I think that immediately puts everybody's defensive mechanisms up. I feel like there's a couple ways to go about it. There's the way of basically doing that. There's a way of like exposing it so it becomes like a national, on its own scale, like problem, that people recognize. Or do you think it can be done through like education and science, or and I'd say that last one and all of this, like, for being so ingrained and it's worked in quotes for so many people at such a highest levels, and they've got it done, and obviously there's gold medal winners, and you look at them and you think they're the healthiest people in the world just because of how they look. What are your thoughts?
Well, changing culture is hard, right? The definition of the culture is that they have a shared value and experience, right? So and as far as you said, something drastic happened, in 1998, 3 collegiate wrestlers died, and so a lot of rule change and restrictions and things have come in place due to that, and that in itself has reduced a lot of the rapid weight loss strategies, or the rules that have been implemented because of that have been successful to a degree. But as a collegiate wrestler myself, as a firsthand knowledge and as doing research, rapid weight loss and cutting weight still happens on a huge magnitude across all of wrestling, at least in North America. So that being said, rule changes and literature and whatever else have gone so far, and that's as far as they have gone, right? So what's going to change the culture is creating influence within the culture itself, reaching high-level coaches, explaining to them, or at least having this conversation on rapid weight loss strategies and technique, and changing the leaders' values, or at least allowing them to have a different insight into why a value should change, is going to be, I think, one of the key parts into changing that, so it's talking to coaches and helping them understand the dangers of rapid weight loss or how to go about it a little bit better. And then if athletes are getting their information from their coaches, the coaches can disseminate better information. And so that's kind of the tree of influence, or the different quote unquote discourse that we can talk about that leads itself into a better innovation into the culture. And so, I mean, and again, I don't have any of the answers on how to do this or what the best, situation is, but,
Sure.
but I think that writing what I am writing and influencing how I can is a step in the right direction. Because, you can take away a lot of, in my opinion, improper training strategies and cutting weight and dangerous methodologies. And you take a lot of that away from risking athlete safety. You can take a lot of suffering away from athletes, because for those of you that have not cut weight, cutting weight sucks. It's not a fun process. And we can change an attitude around, cutting weight yields more commitment. Cutting weight, makes you tougher. Cutting weight is going to make you bigger at your weight class, and therefore you're going to have an athletic advantage. And again, I think, what is the research behind that? And the research is, right? So it's like, it's a different perspective, and it's a way to kind of change traditional thought and value around something that is a pretty ingrained practice in most all weight class sports.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but like you said, it's very different because of each population that you work with, right? Professional athlete has a lot of different luxuries with 6 months in between fights, or 2 or 3 months in between tournaments, versus collegiate athlete making weight once or twice a week and rebounding and weight cycling 10 pounds every time. It's on top of a professional athlete's commitment and time into managing their weight. With student athletes, time and commitment to manage their weight are very different, so
Right.
It's hugely multifaceted and hugely interesting, and I think that's why I'm investigating it and investigating research.
I like it. Anything else you wanted to cover in regards to your thesis?
Oh man. As of right now, I think that's as far as I can or could get into it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but it's been a very interesting journey. Like I said, kind of moving from athlete to coach researcher, and looking at every problem through different lens. As an athlete, you start to question and problematize these strategies. Why am I doing this thing that sucks so much that may or may not help me? To coach of, is this the best thing that I should have my athletes doing? If I truly believe a healthier athlete is a better athlete, why am I prescribing this thing that is a decrement to health? And then looking at the research is a lot of reading and a lot of digesting and synthesizing.
Well, you got some time for it now, so that's good.
Yeah, that is something I definitely have time for, reading.
Well, kind of in closing then, if people wanted to reach out to you, if they're interested in this, or potentially gain some access to all the research you have been reading, you mentioned, again, off camera, but you recently started a blog. Where can people follow you? Where can people contact you? Where can people find out more?
So I'm not huge on the whole, social media and everything, but 2 places you can contact me if you want to contact me directly, just through Gmail, which is aFriedman.strong@gmail.com. That's, an email that I check regularly. And then on Instagram, it's strong_a.f is my handle there. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Well, sir, appreciate you being on and sharing some knowledge, and we'll look forward to having you on again here in the near future.
Definitely. Thank you for having me. Thank you for imploring and being curious about what I'm curious about.
Of course, always. It's part of the beauty of the podcast.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Clinically Pressed. Go to clinicallypressed.com for full show notes and links to everything that was covered in this episode. While you're there, you have access to all of our episodes, insights, and shorts. You can find Clinically Pressed on YouTube and any podcast outlet. If you could give us a rating, thumbs up, or review on how we are doing, we would greatly appreciate it. To get more free content delivered to your inbox, sign up for the Total Athletic Therapy newsletter. You'll get direct links to all new Clinically Pressed episodes, reviews on some of the latest research in health and performance, and links to related podcasts and other items meant to help you make the complicated simple and optimize performance. Thank you for listening, and see you next episode.